I'm Chris Stafford, and this is AART, the podcast where we meet the women behind their art.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
My guest this week is the painter and curator Kristin Calabrese. Kristin was born in 1968 in Mountain View, a suburb of San Jose, California, and spent her childhood moving back and forth between Massachusetts and Arizona. Her father, Bill, was an engineer, and her mother, Karen, a housewife. Kristin has a younger brother, Greg, and they grew up, as she explains, in the 70s in a middle-class white American suburb with an abundance of children in her neighborhood. However, Kristin's childhood was not easy. Her father was an authoritarian, and she was bullied by children in school. She says her family environment was very sexist, and she vowed to live a very different life to her mother's. In 1995, Kristin graduated with a Bachelor in Fine Arts from the San Francisco Art Institute and a Master of Fine Arts from the University of California, LA, in 1998. After exploring a variety of mediums in college, she ventured into graphic design and creating websites before eventually concentrating on oils. She says, "My paintings speak plainly, make jokes, and are irreverent. I paint to make my thoughts, feelings, and experience into monuments that mark my small and large personal existence." The focus of Kristin's work includes psychology, humour, politics, and formal issues of composition and representation, primarily through painting. Since the mid-90s, Kristin has held numerous shows in the US and Europe. Solo exhibitions include the Gagosian Gallery in Los Angeles, Brennan and Griffin in New York, and Michael Janssen in Cologne. She's also curated many group exhibitions, including at the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions and Honor Fraser Gallery. Her work is featured in numerous collections, including Saatchi and the Armand Hammer Museum. Together with her husband, artist Joshua Astor, they have a small business for art supplies, making canvases and framing, and then they spend the evenings painting late into the night. Kristin says she's finally in a happy place as an artist and curator at her home in Culver City, Los Angeles. Kristin, thank you for taking the time to do this podcast with me, because you seem to be wearing many hats. So give us a picture of what life is like for you in your studio in LA right now.
Well, it's nice to talk to you. I did just refix my website because I hadn't worked on it in a long time. So it had just been sitting there without my two most recent shows, which were a while ago. So, it was time. And knowing that I was doing this podcast, I wanted people to be able to have a place to look at the paintings. But my studio life in LA right now, in the daytime, I have a small business where my husband and I make stretcher bars and panels and surfaces for other artists in LA. And we are pretty much to capacity all the time. And we have a lot of really great customers who are all other artists, many of whom we went to school with. And also we do a lot of stretching paintings for art galleries that are local, who will have artists ship paintings from overseas in rolls, and then we'll measure them and custom make wood stretcher bars for them and make them look perfect. And every night I paint my paintings, and so I'm pretty much a night owl, and so I guess we'll sort of eat dinner kind of maybe almost at the end of the business day, which is, because the work is pretty physical, we kind of get off a little early. And, so the main work, for the business, for me, for doing, emails and quotes and things like that are from about 10 to about 4, although we're sort of open till 6. And my husband's in the wood shop from usually like 11 to 2 or 3, which is also here in the building. And our studio is in the building as well. So once we're done with work, then we eat and maybe take a little nap for like 30 minutes. And then, we get up and start painting. And I pretty much paint until about 3 in the morning, and then, go home, go to bed, get up, go to sleep, get up, do it over again. So that's pretty much.
Well, you really are a night owl, aren't you?
I am a real night owl, and I don't really sleep that much. But then the weekend, we try to just turn everything off and mostly just paint the entire time. It's like paradise fantasy. Like nobody can reach us at all on the weekend. So it's really great.
So do you paint in the same studio together? Is this something that you can do side by side?
Oh yeah. We paint right next to each other. Actually, he has another studio, but he paints in my studio.
So let's step back to how this journey began for you. You were born in 1968 near San Jose, California, in Mountain View. You said that you were raised moving back and forth between Massachusetts and Arizona. Tell us a little bit about your parents and what they did to involve this kind of lifestyle. And that's Karen and Bill Calabrese, presumably the same surname.
Calabrese is the last name of somebody I was married to for a few years around, I don't know, when did I marry him? Maybe like, when I was like 21 or so. And we got divorced a few years later. But, by then I was sort of already showing my work. So I thought I should save that last name. So I guess we got divorced in like the early 90s. And then I just kept that my name. And my husband's name is Joshua Astor, Aster, not OR. And, I would have taken his name, except for I'm sort of a known person. But my parents are from Beverly, Massachusetts. Both of them. They went to high school in Beverly, Massachusetts. And let's see, what did you want to know about them? Why did we move around? Well, I think my mom, she had worked as a secretary in the 60s, but she lived at her parents' house until she got married, and she saved up and bought herself a fancy kind of Pontiac car. And then my dad was kind of wild, and my parents were very much not like each other. And they did end up getting married, though. And my dad had my mom sell her car, and then they bought a red Corvette and moved to California. And then I was born, and then there's stories like the car was repossessed. Mom then went back to her parents' house because it wasn't like the most supportive relationship. But then my parents were pretty old fashioned, and things like abortion and weren't really legal then, and I don't think they really had much birth control then. And, my mom always told me that, nice girls didn't really use birth control. And, my dad was had been raised, Catholic. So obviously you had to stay with the mother of your child. And so, so when my mom went back to her parents' house, my dad followed. I might be wrong about some of this, but I think it's kind of right. And then he moved in there, and then, family friends and stuff got him a job being an engineer. Well, sort of at an engineering plant, but, my dad hadn't gone to college, didn't really go to college until a little bit, later, when a company he worked for sent him to college for a few engineering classes, but that was a lot later. But, so he really excelled at that, even though he wasn't like a college type, and he was pretty old fashioned, and the family was, very patriarchal, and my upbringing was very strict. And my mom was a housewife, and I do remember when it started becoming in the 70s, it was like, don't call me a housewife, call me a homemaker. I'm not married to the house. But, really it was like, my mom was basically, kind of isolated with children and housework. And, she was really, kind of a servant, and had to pretty much ask permission to do anything or spend anything or whatever. But my dad, really liked, living out in places where he could kind of do four-wheel driving and shoot things and stuff like that. So he got offered like a kind of an engineering job in Arizona. And so they moved there, when I was 5. I guess my brother was born a little bit, before they moved. My brother is 3 years younger than me. And then, so I lived in, Tempe, Arizona for a little while, and we watched our house get built in a housing development, from, it had been farmland. And then, Tempe is pretty much in the Metro Phoenix area, but that was when it was first just, starting to appear. Houses were growing and it was getting bigger. So that was the early 70s. And then, my mom really liked, her friends and everything from Massachusetts, and her mom lived there. And I know that she really wanted to go back to Massachusetts. And, my parents were not really meant to be together, and they're both great in their own way and not great in other ways, but, definitely like oil and water, so I remember when I was 8 and my mom was like, "Oh, Kristin, do you think it would be okay if I moved to Massachusetts? If we went to Massachusetts to visit grandma, but went without dad?" And I was like, "Well, sure. He gets to go places all the time." And then it turned out that she told him that I had said it was okay for them to get divorced, which of course I didn't. And they didn't end up getting divorced then, but, we did move back to Massachusetts because my mom really wanted to, and my dad got another job back there. And then after a few years, my dad got another job in Arizona, so it was like just sort of that, it was a tug of war, I think, between the two. And also, so I was always the new kid in school, and I always had to try to figure out how to get along with people. And it was a little easier in Arizona because most people in Arizona in the 70s and 80s sort of came from broken homes from other places, or they moved there from Illinois or whatever. But Massachusetts was, like everyone had lived in whatever town for generations. So those kids were quite mean, but I think I'm digressing.
I'm wondering, as a child with that kind of background, what you did as your diversion, with school and with friends, and if that indeed led to art as something that you enjoyed doing as a diversion.
Well, I think because I moved around a lot, I didn't really, I would sometimes have a couple friends, but I didn't have a lot of friends a lot of the time. So I was a heavy reader, and I was really into drawing and painting and making little things in my room. And I also, when we lived in Massachusetts, I really liked to play by myself in the woods and look for rocks, special rocks, or, things. And actually, this one town that we lived in, Bedford, Massachusetts, and we had maybe a couple of acres of land around the house, and we lived in a cul-de-sac, but it was called a circle. And our neighbor on one side of the house was an older woman who she would take rocks that were found in the woods that were maybe 6 or 8 inches long, and they were kind of rounded and bean shaped maybe. And she would paint the rocks to look like bunnies. So she would paint that, put paint on them and make, they were very beautiful. And then she would cover the bunny with like a shiny kind of glaze. And she would put her rejected bunnies, the ones that didn't turn out that good, back in the woods. So occasionally I would find one of these beautiful kind of messed up bunny rocks. That might have been a little bit of an influence, but I really just spent all of my time alone in my room mostly, or alone outside. So, and I read all my dad's books because he was also a heavy reader and he was really into science fiction. So there was, we would also go to the library every week and get a lot of books. And so with those, I would read horror and science fiction. So it was very imaginative. And, when I was, doing stuff outside, I would, sometimes I would pretend I was on like some secret mission, so that I don't know. I was a pretty weirdo. But I was also pretty severely bullied. So, I was, just trying not to get picked on or beaten up. But, definitely, I think all that time alone, before there was an internet, before television was interesting, when there was really nothing to do, was very good for making art. And also, my grandma was extremely meaningful to me. So when I would live in Massachusetts, I would spend every weekend with her, and she super crafty. She sewed all of my clothes and her clothes and my mom's clothes, and she was an expert seamstress, and she owned a lingerie shop in Danvers, Massachusetts, that was named after my mom. My mom's name is Karen Ann, so she had the Karen Ann shop. So I did spend some time in that magical place. And it was, lingerie, like, girdles, heavy girdles and bras that were sort of almost like armor that women used to stuff themselves into. You really don't see that kind of thing anymore, but Um, so I would hang out with the buttons on the floor and stuff.
Well, I was then thinking of your painting of your mother's panties that's on your website. Is there a correlation there?
That painting is from when I was maybe about 12 years old. My parents' dresser had a lot of things in it that were very intense for a little girl. So, my dad had all his pornography magazines in the bottom drawer on his side, and my mom had her underwear. And my mom was, she wasn't a big woman then. She's not a big woman now, but she was kind of curvy, and she would wear those kind of, they call them granny panties now, but I think they were just sort of normal then. They were, kind of satin and shiny, and they were high-waisted. And, so I was just getting to the point where I was about to become a woman, which I definitely did not want to do. I really wanted to be a boy. And, everything about it seemed very off-putting. And so I opened up my mom's lingerie drawer one time, and I think it was because I was putting away laundry or something. I don't really remember. I mean, I wasn't sneaking around in their drawer, but I opened up the drawer, and out came these giant kind of aqua-colored panties, and they were just, they just seemed as larger than life as those panties actually did. And it was, it was almost like a very almost suffocating, horrifying memory that, made me think, oh no, this is what I'm going to be. And, I don't know, that body of work that I did that has those panties in it was, a real, place was where I was sort of going back to, trying to define things that are meaningful in some sort of way. And I kind of didn't really know exactly what paintings I was going to make for the next show. So, that was that's just one of those very strong memories. So that's why I was compelled to make them.
Now, in terms of school, you mentioned that you were bullied, but were there any happy times? Were there any discoveries that you were enjoying? Was it art? Was it literature?
Well, I like learning, and I did well in school, and people would, be nice to me during class so they could copy my tests. I was also fast at running, and because usually I was running from them, but I would be picked first in like relay races and stuff like that. But I was uncoordinated, so I would be not picked when there was something like baseball, happy memories in school. I have a memory of being in second grade and the teacher give it in art class, which I think kids in the U.S. in public school for the most part don't have art classes anymore, but in the 70s they did everywhere. And I remember a teacher in the second grade handing out pieces of black paper and colored chalk. And she taught us how to make a 3-dimensional sphere on the black paper. using like, a turning shadow, complementary colors. I don't really remember the exact lesson, but the image is like seared into my mind, and that was really wonderful. Another thing that I liked was maybe in ninth grade, we learned the first 18 lines of I think it was the Canterbury Tales in Middle English or something. It was like, one that uprode with the shore of Sota, the drought of March has person to the road. And I still remember that. We all had to recite that, which was fun. Yeah, those are some good. I mean, I liked school. I just, had trouble with moving and students picking on me and stuff.
And then college came, and you had to choose your career path at that point, or at least your education, which direction you would go. Was it always art then? What were the influences that took you down that pathway at that stage in your life, Kristin?
This is a Pandora's box question. I think probably most of the questions are going to end up that way, but my mom told me when I was 3 that I told her that I wanted to be an artist. And, that is weird that I would have told her that, because I clearly didn't have artist parents or anything. But I started out at Arizona State University, and, my family being, kind of conservative, mostly in not a religious way really, but just, kind of not cool or fun or anything. They definitely wouldn't have supported me going to college for art. And, I always really wanted to impress my dad because, he was so stern and all that kind of stuff. So when I first went to college, I was sort of torn between studying biology and studying engineering. So I was doing a lot of math and a lot of science. I mean, in high school, I also had a biochemistry class and a genetics class at my high schools. Those were in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that they were really, really interesting subjects. So, I was, for the first time in my life, I was living on my own. And, I guess because I wasn't, that socialized with other kids, I kind of, started, partying a lot and, doing a lot of psychedelic drugs and things like that. And, I had sort of a psychotic break when I was a sophomore, and, I don't know. It was, I tried to kill myself, and I, dropped out of school. And I think all the acid that I did, it made me think that life didn't make sense at all. And, my upbringing was actually very mean. It was sort of mean at home and mean not at home. And so, I told my mom I wanted to move back home, and she told me that I couldn't move back home because I always was a problem and got in the way of her and my dad getting along. And well, that was before I tried to kill myself. I just told her I wanted to move home, and she didn't want me to. And then I tried to kill myself with sleeping pills. And I know that's not funny, but I just didn't, I just really had nowhere to turn. And so I but after I'd eaten like a lot of sleeping pills and painkillers and things that I'd sort of been collecting for a while, like a suicide kit, then I had this flash in my mind that was sort of like, oh no, what if life doesn't really end? What if you go to hell? Or what if you're reincarnated and you have to do it over or whatever? Some kind of crazy thinking as I was, really overdosed on a lot of pills, over and under the counter pills. So I got some dorm mates, and I told them what I'd done. And, we were like, 18. And so, we'd heard that it was illegal to try to kill yourself. So we didn't want to call anyone or tell anyone. So we walked from our dorm over to the hospital. And I kept passing out and stuff. So they were sort of dragging me and two women friends. And we ended up in front of a convenience store and I was just falling on the ground, and some guys in a pickup truck were like, oh, do you need a lift? And so we just got in the back and they brought me to the hospital, and, I had my stomach pumped and all this stuff. And so I basically, dropped out of school and, like I actually went into a mental hospital for a little while, and they put me on lithium, and I was inpatient for a couple of months, and then afterwards, I got out, and I didn't go back to school right away because I just realized that a lot of the things that I thought made sense about living didn't make sense to me anymore. And I sort of had to rebuild, what mattered to me. So, I mean, I think if I hadn't had that experience, I would probably be like, a fiscal Republican type person who was, very, type A and disapproving of everyone and, just working at my lab job or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with someone who's a scientist, because obviously we need them. But I had to, it just, that experience made me sort of feel like I could see society from a very outside position. And I think, because I was so rejected by my peers when I was a kid, it made me see everything from a really outside perspective too. And so I had to figure out something that I could do that I felt would not be used for bad or wouldn't harm people, because it just seemed like capitalism was so evil, and even most science was used for war or to, kill things. And so I always really loved art, and it kind of, I kind of made some sort of almost a deal with like, my idea of God or goddess or the universe or whatever. I mean, I sort of pretty much an atheist, and I probably was then too, but, with, the magic energy, I made a deal that was like, if I can be an artist and I can live an artist life, I won't kill myself. So that was the path I went on, but I went very much into, the very hardcore punk scene, and my parents didn't support me doing an artist education, and they made too much money for me to be able to get student loans, or until I was considered independent at 24. So once I became 24, I took out student loans and I applied to the San Francisco Art Institute, something I wouldn't have even known existed, an actual school for people to be artists. Because I just thought everything was just work and not fun and, nothing amazing, nothing beautiful. And I had a roommate who had all these art school books, and she was kind of an artist. And I was working as a bus hop at a restaurant, and she did too. And so we were roommates together. So I got exposed to even the idea that there were student loans, and that was a possibility, or that, there was an art school by, living with her. I mean, information, in the 80s wasn't like it is now. There was the 3 television stations, and there was nowhere to really find stuff out unless somebody told you, which is why I didn't really even realize there could possibly be such an amazing thing as an art school that you could possibly go to and meet actual people who were actual artists.
What form did your art take at that time, Kristin? Were you painting? Was it oils? What mediums were you using?
Well, I started painting with acrylic and spray paint because those were accessible before I went to art school. And at some point, the first year in art school, I started painting in oils.
And what did you enjoy most? And how you were able to express yourself in those mediums?
Well, I don't know. I mean, when I got into art school, I wanted to be able to do everything. So, I took sculpture, and I took performance art, and, I took painting and drawing classes, but also, I got really into photography, and the school was amazing. In San Francisco, up on top of a hill. It just recently just went out of business and closed forever. But which is the saddest thing. But it was a profound experience, and they had these giant painting studios, and it was pretty expensive to live there, and I was totally poor and just taking out loans and living off loans and whatever. And some of the time I would live in the school building, sort of hide in different areas. I had a work-study job. I had 2 work-study jobs, and one of them was in the rack room in the painting department. So I ended up, having a way of always getting all the keys to everything. Like, I like to sort of be able to, I don't know, there is this sort of working class mentality thing that I have where, people who have a lot of money know how to order people around and get other people to do stuff, but the people who know how to do stuff are the ones that are, so in some ways, even though they're in charge, actually sort of we're in charge because we're the ones with the keys, and we're the ones who know how to boil an egg, So anyways, so I would have the keys, and, I would stay all over in the school, but I would paint for hours and hours. And I guess I did a lot of painting out of my head. And that school, they didn't give you any assignments. The first assignment I had in painting school, the first semester, the first assignment in painting class was make a 4-foot by 4-foot canvas and then make a painting on it. So they would just throw you off into the deep end right away. And they didn't teach any of the basics. Like, they didn't teach anything that a normal school would teach. Like, they didn't really teach I guess they sort of taught color theory, but it was sort of talked about in kind of different ways. Push, pull. Yeah, definitely there was some kind of, turning the corner of things, not through value, but more through complementary color. But a lot of the teaching was just done through critique. And mostly things were just out of everybody's head. And majority of my teachers were abstract expressionists, in the painting department. And I would tend to sometimes work, from photos and I had a natural, desire towards, narrative because I, did have sort of a lot of stories I wanted to tell, a lot of which I was sort of interested in structure of relationships as well, and structure of narrative. And so I could actually almost depict that in kind of not really a physical way, but a physical visual way on paintings. And, I guess when I first, also in the first or second year of painting, you get that thing where you're really self-conscious and you just have this big white canvas. So I just worked bigger and bigger, 7 foot, 8 foot, whatever. And we'd all build those things ourselves, and nobody really had a car in San Francisco. So I'd carry wood home on top of my head from the lumber store but build giant stretcher bars and stretch canvas over them. And, I'd be self-conscious about what I was painting, and I wouldn't know what I want to do. So anything at all that came to mind, I would just draw it on the canvas with paint any way possible. Just get it on there, stick it on there, do whatever, look at it, try to figure out, if the painting had an inner logic or, that kind of thing. The other departments, photography was amazing. Narrative was amazing. Darkroom photography was amazing. The crit classes, like second semester photography, was less interesting, or maybe third semester, because it would be like 3 hours of critiquing. And because the first year was all in the dark room. So it was like you had something to do. And that much critiquing 6 hours a week is every single class is pretty boring, but we did a lot of narrative sequencing and the new genres, performance video stuff was like super exciting. Although and so I do always love performance. And then kind of hated my drawing class. I didn't like my drawing teacher, and I noticed, he was a nice guy, but I sort of noticed that he was giving everybody the same advice when he was looking at their work as he was going around the room. And the tables were set up so that my drawing was in front of me and the teacher would walk around behind you. And I just didn't like him coming up around behind us, not for any inappropriate reason, just, it just felt sort of invasive with, sort of the drawing space. So, I ended up changing it, so I took printmaking instead of drawing, and so I got to do a lot of stuff in printmaking as well. And I got to do some welding, and I really didn't like welding because it actually I thought was made me claustrophobic when you put that hood on, and all of it was kind of too intense. So and my camera equipment all got stolen twice. So that's really how I ended up really being a painter. So that.
Well, I was going to ask if there were any teachers who did leave an impression on you.
Oh, yeah, they all left impressions on me for sure. I hear them in my inner ear all the time still. And some of those voices aren't helpful. but a lot of them really are.
Were there any that were guiding you at that time then in terms of your career path, Kristin?
Yeah. I mean, in undergrad, my teacher, Pat Klein, I ended up being very close to her. And I applied for the New York studio program. This is all the early 90s. Two of the students from SFAI would be awarded the residency at a New York studio program, which was in Tribeca. And I got that award, and I got to go there for a semester in maybe it was 93. And, Pat, Pat Klein came to, I don't remember how I got told about that, but she came to visit me or she came to New York, and then she wanted to visit. And I said, I'm too busy working in my studio. I can't really visit. And then she said, oh, you shouldn't do that, Kristin. When somebody wants to come and see your work, who's like professional contact or whatever, then you should meet with them. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then she was like, there was a glass blowing program in New York that I was sort of interested in going into. And she said, and this was very much the attitude in the 90s, and it is not so much the attitude now, but she said, oh, you don't really want to go into things like glass because that's craft and not a fine art or not a high art. And so I didn't go into glass, which is probably for the best, but it's still, I am fascinated with all things craft. So, and then also, a lot of things, I had another teacher named Mark Johnson who, he told me that I was going to be an art star. And, that's kind of a crazy thing to say to someone. And then and I think it might have been him that he told me to apply for Skowhegan, which I also did apply for and go to in, right after the New York studio program, which is it's an amazing program in Maine where you go for 9 weeks and, there's, famous artists are there. There's like something like 40, students or people from around the country that get into that, like just painters and sculptors. And, I got to do a fresco in the barn and, we'd have lectures and, lived there, swam in the pond and, just painted our brains out while, trying to keep the gypsy moths out of the paint. But yeah, those teachers, but maybe my grad school teachers are maybe more in my head. And I went to UCLA for grad school and I was there from 95 to 98. And, I don't know. I learned a lot there. I also learned that, you have to kind of try to wipe all the stuff you learned out of your brain and get back to who you really are afterwards, after school is over.
Well, it sounds as if you learnt an awful lot. You tried your hand in so many different things in school. And I'm wondering then at what point, or even if you did realize as you graduated that you did have some real talent. Were there any rock star moments there when you thought, I could make a living out of this. This is something I could make a go of? Are there people that believe in me, that think I have real raw talent?
Well, no, I didn't really think that would happen. I mean, I guess I thought you could probably do portraits of people and stuff like that. But I do know that people who get out of art school, studio artists, are super capable of doing almost anything. Like, I can paint anything. I can make anything. I can also make websites. So, and I'm really independent. But, those kind of talents make it hard to get a job when you get out of school. So while I was in grad school, I also took some workshops in how to make websites. So around 2000, I was working in a shop where I was making, I got out of school. I rented a warehouse that was not far from my school. Back then, everything in LA was cheap, and there were lots of just giant buildings that you could just rent. And so I moved into like a messed up warehouse that was pretty much full of toxic chemicals and that leaked when it rained and flooded, and had no windows, no heat or air conditioning. I mean, it's temperate here, but it still was pretty cold in the winter, and not so hot though. But I kept trying to get a job. Like I tried to get hired at Home Depot, and they wouldn't hire me, obviously, because I had a master's degree, because I had to, I'd get art handling jobs. I mean, it was pretty harrowing getting out of school and trying to figure out how to pay the bills and stuff. But at the end of grad school, I'd, done workshops in, trying to learn how to do websites and Photoshop and stuff. And then I read one of those Pit Press books on hand coding HTML. And then on job boards, I think they, I don't remember. They were pretty. I made a funny website that just had a picture of a couch, and I said, "Please hire me and get me off the couch." And so, and I did an internship with Spumco, who did Ren and Stimpy, making their cartoon George Liquor cartoons into vector files for the web, and I worked there for free. I mean, I did a lot of jobs for free interning, and but also I did a little bit of props work in the movie industry for like some heavy sculpture, 1/3 size kid set, things for Nickelodeon, and that's horrible work. And, that kind of stuff. But then I, eventually got, very good at making websites. Around 2000, I worked for a small company called Diablo, and we did all the websites for like Mattel and Disney and, Miramax and stuff like that, because they didn't have, a web department yet. So it was a 3-person shop, which is pretty amazing. But then, I was still making paintings in my warehouse, even though I was also, really, working all the time doing these websites and stuff. And, there's an artist named Mary Weatherford, and she was teaching at UCLA, when I was a grad student there. And she was sort of an artist in residence, and they gave her a studio in the building. So she was making paintings in the studio, which is a warehouse in Culver City. And I was painting all the time too. So we'd be there in the middle of the night together, and she'd be like, "Do you have any cadmium red?" And I would have some cadmium red, and, we would just whatever, hang out in the middle of the night or whatever. And then afterwards she went back to New York, but she was dating the artist Dave Muller. He's an LA artist now. and they dated for a while, and she ended up moving out here to be closer to him, and they're not together. That was really just a short thing back then, but it did cause her to move out here. And Dave Muller was doing a thing called 3-Day Weekend, and he had been doing that out of his studio, I think at CalArts. And when there were 3-day weekends, he'd have art shows of people's work. And his career had taken off, and part of that had been through curating other artists who he would meet for 3-day weekends for shows in Europe and things all over the place. So Mary Weatherford, who I'd known from my time at grad school, brought her then boyfriend, Dave Muller, over to my studio, and he liked my work. And he put some work of mine in a show at California College of Arts and Crafts. It's called CCA now, but it used to be CCAC, and it's sort of in Oakland and San Francisco. And then put me into something else. And then there was the art writer, curator, critic, Terry Myers was asked to curate a show at Gagosian Gallery. This was maybe in 2000 or 99 or something. And the artist that he put, like, I don't know, 5 artists in the front big main room at the Gagosian in Beverly Hills, and then the back room, Dave Muller curated a 3-day weekend, and I was one of the artists he put into that. And then one of the people from Gagosian, Robert Shapagian, was the director there, and he really loved my work, and he wanted to come over for a studio visit. And, that's one of the biggest galleries in the world. And I thought it was ridiculous that he wanted to come over, because of course they weren't going to show my work. So I was sort of like, I don't know, what do you want? That seems weird. So I was almost, if anything, kind of like the opposite of receptive. I mean, which is ridiculous. But I mean, when I was in art school in undergrad, what they really stressed was you don't want anyone to see your work until you feel like it's ready. And the main thing was really the work and not the career. And, my artwork was, sacred to me. And so I sort of felt like I would have a different job, and then I would do my artwork separate, so that what some person that wasn't like the voice of my artwork, the inner living, breathing relationship I'm having with my paintings would not be interrupted by like outside voices. But anyways, did let him come over, and then they gave me a show at the gallery, which was a mixed experience, but also I started making money from paintings. So then I had to paint more, and there were other shows coming up, which, was great. But I had this web job that I'd worked so hard to be able to be good at. So it was a little bit hard to like let that go at the same time. But I did. And, I tried to do both at first, like the web job part-time and then the painting part-time. And both of those things, are sort of like all consuming. So it is like pretty hard to have like that kind of computer head space, like in your head kind of space. And then that art space. I mean, they actually almost take up 2 opposite parts of my brain, but very intensely. So to like do both in a week is pretty difficult. So, so anyways, I'll just have art shows, which was amazing. But I was pretty naive in a lot of ways getting in, but you know, I have nothing bad to say about Ugosian. I mean, I'm grateful that they pulled me out of that world and, made me really into like a real artist in a lot of ways. Just, this is it. I'm not some other career. I am just through and through an artist, and everything is, if I ever do any other jobs, those are always secondary to being an artist.
So it was at that point really that you felt you'd arrived as an artist, and your confidence must have been building, your self-esteem must have been building too, with that kind of recognition. And you went on to one show after the other. It's been quite the career that you've had, with showings all over Europe as well as across the US. Do you at any point, because you're so busy and so in the trenches right now, Kristin, I'm wondering if you reflect on the journey of your career thus far, and maybe stop and pause and think, well, my goodness, when I think how it all began and the childhood that you had, where does this bring you now? What are you most satisfied about at the end of the day?
Oh God, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like, once I had a show at Gagosian, I definitely wasn't like, okay, I'm confident, I'm here, this and that. So it isn't like that. I mean, then I paid to have 7 years of therapy. It's been a struggle the whole time, really. But as I think actually having I didn't have to work for a little while, and then I did, and then I had some bad auction sales in 2008, and once you have paintings sell at an auction for like much less than someone paid for them, then that's the only place in the international world of money, which at that kind of level, the people that buy your work are like, real, like, if you're lucky, they're buying your work because they love it. But like, there's like a lot of speculation goes on around art. And artists would never get rich if there wasn't that, but there's a lot of bad stuff, a lot of bad art because of that. It's really well known, but, once you have bad auction results, it starts to become like you're a hot potato and nobody wants to, it's like, then you got to go somewhere else, and then you got to whatever. And then maybe you're not selling anything at all from selling everything. And, and then just different teaching jobs and all the pluses and minuses of that, and the changing culture of like academia. And then, I guess really we got comfortable once my husband and I, who I met, maybe like about 15 years ago, who's very much the same kind of super, dyed in the wool painter that I am, even though we're different in a lot of ways. We're very much the same in that way. We just, stopped working for other people and started our own business doing things that we know how to do. And we were able to do that because, we both know 3,000 artists and know lots of art dealers. So it wasn't, so as far as being a small business, people trusted us, knew that we knew what we were doing, and even more than we did. And, we had one of those magical small business stories in that way. And now it allows me to, there was a point where I was really like, where art dealers were really starting to like encroach on, the content of what I would do. So it would be like, maybe one particular kind of painting would sell. And then, you know, they'd be like, well, I have 7 people who want one of those. And can you make those? And I was like, no, I can't make those. I just really couldn't, you know, honestly, I can't really do stuff that I'm not believing in, because actually the craft of painting, the kind of painting that I ended up starting to do, like this kind of hyper realism, is so difficult that unless I'm really believing in the work, like, you know, it's almost too hard to pay attention to. But, you know, having my own business now has allowed me to just not care at all what anybody wants, what anybody thinks. And instead of, I mean, I feel, you know, but of course, I mean, Americans are always precarious. So, you know, but, you know, something could happen and then, you know, it would be rough, but we're good right now, knock on wood. But, I right now am satisfied that I have the luxury and the ability and the pleasure and like the excitement to absolutely get to work, like, you know, 100 hours a week doing exactly what I want, including, you know, the business, which I also love. I mean, I love the opportunity to work with other artists closely on helping them to make exactly what they want by, you know, getting the most beautiful linens and learning the most beautiful surface preparations but I also get to have all that. I'm like a canvas hoarder. So, you know, I have, you know, every kind of art supply I would ever want here at any time. So that, you know, there's a lot of satisfaction in that. But basically with my art, I want the kind of career that, and when I say career, I don't really think about, I don't mean like I want people to recognize me. I mean, that seems like a nightmare, to be an artist who everybody knows your name. And they look at you and point at you. And I mean, it's sort of cool, but it's sort of not cool. I did have a little bit of that. I guess, I don't know. I mean, you know, there starts to be so much art business. It gets to be hard to do art painting. And I do not want to hire assistants. I want to make my own work, make my own mistakes. But as far as where I want my work to go, I am looking for my masterpiece. I mean, and I honestly feel like, you know, this sounds kind of, you know, arrogant, but I think I've made a lot of masterpieces actually. But I really want to break into that thing, like, you know, I think most artists who have went to the kind of art school trajectory that I went through, painters, a lot of us look to Philip Guston and the way, you know, he had a lot of success early on, and then he kind of fell into illustration and wasn't really finding the real thing he was doing. And then he just burst into these amazing paintings that, like, just, you know, became just what everybody is so into. I mean, Mary Heilemann is another artist who's had that kind of trajectory. It took her a long time, even though she had enough success to have her in the art world early on. She didn't really break through with the kind of work that she does now, you know, until pretty kind of, you know, a little later in life, you know. But I mean, really, it was Guston who just had this massive breakthrough into this style. I mean, I do not want to direct the style of my work. I want the work to tell me what to do by making the work. I see the work, and then it just gives me ideas instead of trying to use like my, you know, frontal, you know, my front brain that makes up ideas and schemes and stuff. I really want it to work more through the body and the subconscious kind of work I'm going towards.
And it seems from your description of where you are now, Kristin, that this is the definition of happiness for you.
Yeah, it is.
It's taken a while, but you've arrived.
Yeah, I have. Well, I've been pretty happy. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the last 5 years have been pretty much gravy. Very good. And I know we went through COVID, but honestly, yeah, COVID was horrible and so scary. But I mean, I know there's a lot of painters who, I mean, it is, it is a little hard. I mean, I love having friends and those kinds of things, but it is a little hard. There's so many events and so many, all sorts of things that you're supposed to go to. But you really want to just be in the studio. And so a lot of painters are always feeling guilty that they didn't go to somebody's show or do this or that because they wanted to, but they just really can't get out of the studio because the studio is so magnificent and wonderful.
Thank you so much for sharing a very personal journey with me. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was great talking to you, Chris. You really asked just the perfect questions.
You'll find a link to Kristin's website and her social media in the show notes accompanying this episode. And also, if you're on social media, please follow us at the AART Podcast. That's art with 2 A's. And I'd love to hear from you if you have any favorite artists that you would like to hear from on the show. And if you're not on social media, you can drop us an email to hollowellstudios@gmail.com. That's Hollowell, HOLLOWELL. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to leave us a review and a 5-star rating because that helps others find the show because it improves our ranking and visibility. My guest next week will be the artist Rebecca Youssef, so I do hope you'll join me then.